Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going to be finishing up with the classical ancient Greek period, moving into late classical, which is 400 to 323 BCE. We left off with the victory parapet from the Temple of Athena victory, showing she in her very graceful and elegant fashion of slipping on a sandal and showing her victory with grace. And the element of organic drapery was highly evolved or highly elevated in in that piece of sculpture, and indicating to us again that whenever it comes to the female body in particular, that there's a high emphasis on this organic drapery. And we can see, and you should be able to know and discuss in the future, how that progresses from very simple folds and pleats that we see all the way back in the Orientalizing period, even into the peplos chore of the Archaic period, ancient Greece, leading all the way up into this classical and late classical or high classical period that we see with the Temple of Athena and the organic drapery that's present upon her body. Almost to the point where it's sheer enough to start to see human anatomy coming through, and the idea of it looking as if it's been drenched in water and placed upon the body. So be able to look back at those figures, figure 556 in particular, and also use the organic drapery that's developing on the Metapede frieze sculptures that we see on the Parthenon. And those figures, for those Metapede sculptures, were figures 549, 549b, 549c, and also 550a. And those were the Metapede frieze sculptures from the Parthenon, and be able to compare and contrast again the progression on where organic drapery has come from in regards to the Orientalizing period of ancient Greece all the way up to this high classical and into the late classical period. So let's look at a late classical piece. We are going to talk about in particular figure 563. And 563 is Praxiteles Hermes and the infant Dionysos. So what's really essential about this is, one, we're going to see a very specific feature that's going to transition to actually very specific features that are going to transition into the Hellenistic period, which is the last period of ancient Greece. And the first is the detail that we're seeing in the hair, and as well as that organic drapery. You can see now who is who. Hermes is the standing figure, and infant Dionysos is the intimate baby that is upon his left arm, right above the organic drapery. And the level of detail that is seen in a clustered, almost group-like fashion in the hair of Hermes is so detailed in each individual cluster, as well as the organic drapery just below the infant, that's really going to transition into the Hellenistic period and be highly emphasized. Also, what's going to be emphasized is relationships, the idea of compatible relationships and the playfulness that's involved in relationships and the emotions that go into relationships. So this is really one of our first pieces that we see in figure 563, where there's this intimacy between two different figures. Most of the time there is some kind of related event that is more war-stricken and on that fold of things, but in this regards it's more of an intimate relationship that is platonic in nature between these two demigods, or these two godlike figures. And so those are the narratives involved with this, but notice the contrapposto and be able to see this as the heightened level of contrapposto that we're going to see in the standing marble sculptures coming from ancient Greece. You can see again that contrapposto and that almost three-dimensional sinuous S-like curve coming off of his left leg up to his left kneecap, back up to his right hip, back into his upper body, curving back to his head, but instead of his head moving away towards the right, back into space, his head is shifting back towards the infant. So that S curve is shifting back towards the infant, and then all that activity that's coming down in the organic drapery is creating this invisible, almost like oval shape that's connecting the two figures together. And that technique and that directional force and that technique and design is creating a more intimate stance between the two. So the use of that contrapposta leading up through Hermes, the organic drapery that's very organic and very much alive, like it is real fabric, coming down below the infant, is tying the two together. So using these mathematical properties as well as these heavy kind of realistic detailed properties to keep the two together. His right arm was up with playfulness of having some grapes in his hand, but over time that has broken away. But the idea of this connection and this intimacy is definitely at its highest point with this piece of sculpture in particular, 563, figure 563. And again, this is that late classical period ranging from 400 to 323 BCE. All right. So one thing that's going to happen during this time is Alexander the Great is going to take over. All right. And Alexander the Great is going to become the new Macedonian king, and he's going to bring Greece back together. And there's going to be a lot of war, and there's going to be a lot of skirmish and a lot of battles that are going to unfold during this Hellenistic period because he's expanding the Greek Empire all the way to India. So their reach and their level of understanding is going to move from northwestern Greece into parts of Europe all the way to India. And his influence is going to be picked up again during the Roman time, which was what we're going to get into after ancient Greece. So look at the face of figure 567, the head of Alexander the Great. You can see again that clustering of hair that's developing. There's also a twist of the head, open eyes, open mouth. There's more of kind of a more organic and almost sensuous kind of presentation of the human being, and sensuous in the regards to a kind of a juicy emotion that's really coming out of the figures. And it's platonic in nature, but it is showing this constant inhale and exhale of life through emotions. And Alexander the Great really wanted the art that was made during this time to have that dramatic look, because he was pulling upon dramas like the Iliad and the Odyssey, and he really saw himself as a living hero that would have been derivative of Ulysses and all of these really strong heroes in the Iliad and the Odyssey. So the artwork was reflecting that drama. So he's really going to show that drama. He was a very passionate, dramatic individual, and he really emphasized that. So when you look at figure 567, the head of Alexander the Great, it's going to show us the importance of drama and emotion and getting away from this very logical, mathematical way of thinking. And now it's very much going to be about theatrics and drama and explosiveness and just incredible passion. And that hairstyle in particular is called the Leonine hairstyle, and that's Leonine, Leonine. So Leo and then 9. And that pattern and that style is going to become very important. As we already saw in the previous figure with Hermes, that collection, that cluster of hair was already starting to develop, but Alexander is going to expand upon it even more. And what Alexander is going to do, he's also going to encourage a new type of capital order upon the top of the columns. So if you look at figure 573, this is called a Corinthian capital. Polykleitos is the younger, Polykleitos the younger versus the original Polykleitos that we saw earlier from the elder, so to speak, from the sculptor as a sculptor. Um, Alexander's going to have this development of a new capital order. So we've had Doric, we've had Ionic, and if you really want to get dramatic and expressive, we have the Corinthian. And so I'm going to need you to know the difference between the three orders now that we have a new one during this Hellenistic period. And I'm so sorry, the Hellenistic period is going to last from 323 to 30 BCE. So 323 to 30. All right, so this is the Hellenistic period. And so you can see with figure 573 this extreme ornamentation. So it's all about surface drama and surface exaggeration, so to speak, if you will. And if you look at figure 574, the Choragic monument, this is going to be a good example of you to see how the Corinthian pillar is used. Yes, these are engaged pillars, and the Corinthian pillars were not used for structural purposes often. They were used as ornamentation on the surface. They would still have the Doric and the Ionic, but then they would have the Corinthian capitals interlaced, so to speak, in the overall architectural, often within engaged columns, because that Corinthian pillar is for ornamentation. It's not for structural purposes, versus the Doric and the Ionic are more for structural purposes. But the Corinthian, again, is a focus on ornamentation. So do keep that in mind. All right. So let's move on in through history. And what's going to happen is the death of Alexander the Great is going to occur, and it's going to divide Greece into three parts. Okay. The main Egyptian and the main Greek and Macedonian area, and then also Egyptian and Asia Minor. So these areas Alexander the Great had conquered. He had conquered Egypt, he had conquered Asia Minor, he had conquered all the way out to India. So there's going to be three different areas in particular that are going to be broken down under different rulers, so to speak, successors of Alexander the Great. All right, I just flipped my page unnecessarily. But I do want to look at one in particular, one altar piece that was designed in Asia Minor after the demise of Alexander the Great, and that's the altar of Zeus. And the altar of Zeus has extreme amount of drama, and it's emotional and it's personal, and this is the time where that drama is really, really going to be activated. Realism is going to be activated, naturalism is going to be activated, the individual look of a person is going to be activated, and all these things are going to be picked up by the Romans, and this is going to be the time when the Romans start to come in and really emphasize other certain canons in particular that focus on realism and what's called Avaism versus that of the idealism that we saw with the Greeks. The first thing I want to talk about with figure 579, the altar of Zeus, is the parapets. And we talked about the Temple of Athena, and the parapet was of Athena as Nike, Victory, putting her sandal on. And you can see at this reconstruction of the west front, the lower sculptural elements, which would be like a lower frieze, and those would be called parapets. All right? So it's a lower frieze. And if you look at figure 580, you can see how much drama and how much emotion and how personal things are really starting to take. And this figure 580 is Athena battling Alcyoneus. And again, it's another detail of driving those giants out. And what's happened is with Alexander the Great is his conquest was so vast that he has found that the Greeks have found that there's more way beyond that of the peninsula of Greece, that there are really incredible opponents out there that are considered barbaric in nature. And so the re-advent or the reinvention of that, driving the giants out, driving the Amazons out, driving the centaurs out, and all these allegorical tales of rationality winning over irrationality is happening, but it's on a more emotional and personal level. So here with Athena, she still is in control, but she's definitely more emotional about her victory. There's definitely more action and activity. There's more placements of twists and turns and curves, and everything is way more dramatic. It's not so much about straight linear lines or really clean curves. It's about very dramatic twists. You can see it in the hair, be able to see how the leonine hair is really starting to unfold in the heads of the giants that are being removed by Athena. The pleats, the organic drapery within her body is really starting to be emphasized. So anything that could look dramatic on the surface superficially and get it become enhanced and ornamentalized, they're going to do that during this Hellenistic period. And the temple or the altar of Zeus is a really great example of where we're going to see that drama really start to unfold. Then the Greeks are going to be up against the Gauls, and the Gauls were a German barbaric group, a Gaelic group coming from the north in Europe, and are going to swoop down into Greece and are really going to add a lot of opposition to the Greeks, and they're going to have to battle them and fight them. And Greece is divided into three parts, so it's hard to reunify during this time. But what the Greeks are doing, like they've always done, is they're giving appreciation to their opposition. They're even making sculptures about the Gauls. And in figure 581, it's a Gaelic chieftain killing himself and his wife. And this is an example of the Greeks carving and designing sculptures showing this pure drama, pure emotion, pure expression, even for their opposition, because they make and they display and depict their opposition as strong and virile, because they ultimately overcame their opposition. The Greeks overcame the Gauls' opposition, but they're still showing their character of strength, because the Greeks ended up winning out over their strength, so defeating opponents that are equal or greater than, right? But with this figure 581, you can see the emotion. He's stabbing himself with a sword. It's not about a continuous sine curve. It's about distortion and twist, and the hair is thick and very grouped together with that leonine hair, and then the hair of his wife is draping down over her face, and there's a lot of expression and almost torture. And that goes back to what I originally talked about. Whenever there's extreme war and extreme strife and division that's happening, all of those emotions will start to flood into the sculptures. And this is at the height of it. The Hellenistic period is at the height of all those emotions from all those wars for hundreds of years in Greece, finally starting to take over the aesthetics of the artwork. Just before Greece, the Greek Empire essentially falls, and then the Roman Empire starts to begin. We see again in figure 582 a dying Gaul, all right? And you can see that leonine hair and the wounds upon his body, the nude, the presence of complete surrender and complete exposure to death. This is very derivative of the dying warrior that we saw on the western and eastern pediment of the Temple of Apheia. But here they're depicting their opposition that has fallen. And you can compare and be able to compare this Hellenistic dying Gaul, figure 582, to those figures that we saw with the dying Greeks on the Temple of Apheia, and see the difference in the sheer amount of detail and emotion and expression and personalization, meaning that this could be an actual personal Gaul that was there on the battlefield after being struck down by the Greeks. But they were victorious. The Greeks were. So 583, Nike alighting on a warship. This is called the Nike of Samothrace. And this, again, is that victory, that forward victory that the Greeks have always kept in the forefront, and that their ways and their beliefs and their philosophies will always be carrying them forward into victory. And so this is a freestanding sculpture of Nike, that victorious win of grace and elegance and beauty that is embodied in this Nike form. The organic drapery is wrapped around it to show those technical aesthetic details that the Greeks did so well. And the wings are still preserved, and everything is essentially still there except for the arms and the head. But that victory is still present, and it's epitomized through figure 583. So when you look at figure 583, I want you to know the importance of the organic drapery, the movement forward, again bringing that leg forward to show that movement, that secular progress and that secular rational dominance over everything that's been irrational throughout the emotional times of the Hellenistic period is finding its way in here again. So just like the Egyptian canons we saw all the way back in the archaic period of ancient Greece is slightly coming back, but again, it's a secular decision of winning over irrationality, not a spiritual decision. Okay, but there's a lot of emotions and a lot of personalization involved in this embodiment of Nike. And then what's going to happen is they're going to start to show us like a person from the street, an everyday person like you and me. They're no longer going to be depicting sculptures at the very end of the Hellenistic period. They're not going to be depicting sculptures of Greek gods. They're not going to be depicting sculptures of victory, allegorical figures that are depicting victory, mythological. They're going to start getting down to the nitty gritty. And figure 587, Old Market Woman, is a good example of that. So they're no longer going to cover up blemishes. They're no longer going to cover up anything that is considered non-personal. So they're going to look at an everyday person and they're going to start to create that everyday person. And that's what Old Market Woman shows us. It still has all the incredible advancements of detail and technique that the Greeks have done for hundreds of years leading up to 150 to 100 BCE. But it's going to be about you and me. It's going to be about the everyday. This is the lady who is living in Greece after all of these Hellenistic wars, all these Peloponnesian wars, all these Trojan wars, all of these old ancient wars that occurred during the Greek Empire. And here she is, just still working hard, still progressing. It's almost like these epitomized, or she like epitomizes this victory that was in the divine or in the firmament, in the higher echelons of divinity, and it's been brought down to the everyday person. And it's becoming more personalized. And this is going to be the beginnings or the advents of what the Romans are going to be interested in, what's called Veism. And in the next video with Roman art, I'm going to be talking about Veism during the Roman Republic time very quickly. But I want you to look at figure 587 and see how this is going to influence a lot of what the Romans are going to start sculpting whenever they get into making their artwork during the Roman Empire. Also, figure 588. It is Demosthenes and Demosthenes, and this is a speaker. This is a philosopher. This is someone who's known for his own personal studies, and an orator, and someone who's speaking on behalf of the mind over the body. And it's very much him. It is a portrait of him. It's a self-portrait. And that's another thing that's going to come into the works, besides just the sheer realism of what's called Veism, but also the self-portraiture, showing the person what he actually looks like. He's balding. He has different marks on his body. He's older. He's showing his wisdom and his age. He's not trying to show this ideal youthfulness. The organic drapery is folded and pleated in ways like he's wrapped that same toga around him for 40 years. So this aged wisdom is coming with this emotion and this drama during the Hellenistic period. And these figures, 588 and 587, are going to be the transitional pieces, and that's going to segue us into the Roman art, which is chapter 7. Okay, so I'll get this posted for you, and then we'll get going with Roman art and begin with the early Republic Roman arts. Okay.